Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the vlog. I was thinking about this topic for a while, hence why I haven't posted it yet. But essentially, in this episode of how to learn Jiu-Jitsu, I want to talk about how to correctly watch DVDs. This has become an awesome and pretty much revolutionary resource in the jiu-jitsu space pretty much in the last decade. But in saying that, it's quite a straightforward topic. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about something from the philosophy of teaching called the circle of inquiry. I'll talk about that at the end because let's be honest, some of you might not want to hear about that. So let's get straight into it. When it comes to DVDs, we've seen a huge proliferation in DVD products in the last decade, right? Back when I started in around 2012, we were just seeing the emergence and the popularity of YouTube and, video contents and stuff like that. There were some early guys that were, doing DVD products and things. I'm not specifically going to plug anyone's stuff here, just, unless they fucking pay me to do so, which they don't, so I'm not gonna. But essentially, yeah, it's come to the stage now where a lot of the top level guys have produced DVDs. You can pretty much buy a DVD on any part of the jiu-jitsu game these days. And I think that there's pros and cons to that. With the proliferation of knowledge like that, I think you see a lot of people snapping up DVDs and looking to quote unquote collect content, and collect techniques. So, there's a lot. I've met a lot of people who are like, the kind of encyclopedia of moves, but when push comes to shove, they can't execute them when it comes to rolling or training with someone who's giving even moderate resistance. Now, my problem with that is that kind of serves to function in that dilution of the sport a little bit. It's like, it's great if we know everything, but if you can't put it into practice, you don't truly know something. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the second half of this video. But in my general opinion, I think that the best way to use a DVD as a good resource for your training is to look at very specific parts. I think a lot of people, they buy a DVD and they'll sit down and they'll watch it from start to finish. They'll look at instructional content as this thing where it's like, okay, well, there's a 4-hour DVD, I'm going to watch it. There's no way you're going to absorb all of that, and it's not going to be helpful if you watch it in that format. Okay, firstly, you're gonna lose your attention span very quickly. You're not going to be able to watch that whole thing with good concentration. But secondly, you're going to lose a lot of the actual value, I believe, in what is in a DVD or an instructional. What I recommend that you do is, if you've got a DVD, firstly, you have to ask yourself, what am I looking for, right? So before we even buy the DVD, oh, well, I'm having this particular problem. And, we talked about this a little bit last time with the match footage and the competition footage analysis that we did. So if you haven't watched that, you should probably go back and have a watch of that video. Let's say I'm a blue belt, purple belt, it doesn't matter really, but I find in my game I have a problem with a specific thing. I'm struggling to pass half guard. Okay, well, who's got a good half guard DVD on the market? X person does. I look at the reviews, I look, it's great. Okay, well, this person has been able to execute what they've shown in high level competition. Cool, I'm going to get that DVD. So, now that I'm sitting with the resource, I don't want to just watch the whole thing because they're going to show you a dozen different ways to pass the half guard, right? Depending on how the DVD is structured, they might have things like key concepts. They might have the specific moves. I think if you can grasp the concepts and the ideas that a person is using from their DVD, that is a worthwhile pursuit. You may then take those moves in isolation, watching maybe one of those techniques, and then go and try it in your training. I don't think you want to go and watch all dozen techniques. Let's say they've got like 10 to 12 moves on the DVD. You're not going to hit all of those, okay, in one go. I think the most important thing that you do is you take one at a time. You watch it, you look at the key details, and then you go and try and implement it in practice. That's probably the most effective way to do that. We need to understand that a DVD is a resource. It's information that we have to process, and it's something that you can't just sit and be like, okay, well, I've watched it and like I'm Neo plugged into the Matrix and now I just know it. It doesn't work that way, okay? You pretty much, it's going to take you time to absorb what's being said on that DVD, to understand what they're saying, to look at the details of the move, and then go and put it into your own training. So watch small chunks of the DVD and then go and use it in your training. I mean, I'm not really saying anything revolutionary here. This should pretty much be obvious. And I would hope that people, with the amount of money that they pay for some of these DVDs, are looking for the best way to seek out value and how to best use it. Because I know people who have hundreds of DVDs. They've watched them, but they can't execute any of the moves or even do basic recall about what they've seen because they haven't processed it and helped it inform their game. Okay, so I mean, really, that's all I have to say on the topic. I'm not here to say don't buy DVDs. I'm not here to say go and buy DVDs. You know, some people like it. You know, some people really find them useful. Some people like it just to see different ideas or to get access to high-level instructors that they would never otherwise be able to get access to. So honestly, I think that proliferation is really good. It used to be that if somebody had a certain armbar technique and you'd never seen it before, you would like never be able to learn it unless you went to them. And even then, they might not even show it to you. The same with leg locks or whatever. So the proliferation of DVDs and the amount of information that is just out there, hell, even for free, never mind what you need to pay for, is huge. And it's revolutionized the sport. It's really taken us through, it's accelerated the speed at which the sport has progressed. And I think that that's a positive thing. So I'm not here to criticize DVDs at all. Sometimes I do wonder, I guess my only criticism here is that certain people will just put a DVD out with a bunch of moves on it that, they've kind of maybe come up with, or, they've rebranded or whatever, that are already out there. And, they're marketing it as their own. I mean, branding is just a thing that happens in the sport anyway. So that's more just an observation than a criticism. Everyone's going to do that, you got to make money somehow in the sport. So I can't really knock that kind of thing too much. So, in short, if you are buying DVDs and you're watching them, I think it's important to try and understand the underlying concepts that a person is trying to convey with the moveset and the content on that DVD. And then secondly, watch small bits in isolation to troubleshoot the parts of your game that you need help with. Don't sit and watch 4 hours back to back, because then you've just really bought yourself a very expensive sleep aid. You don't need to do that, okay? I hear a lot of people saying, oh, I bought this guy's DVD and now I play it on two times speed or whatever. Okay, well, like, are we just watching the DVD for the sake of watching it, or are we actually trying to absorb what's being said? Because if you're actually trying to absorb what's being said, you're not going to double speed. You're going to sit, you're going to watch small parts of it, and then soak that up, and then go, okay, well, how does this fit into my understanding of what we're doing here? I think it's important for you to recognize that and think about how you do that if you are using DVDs as a resource. So, that's really all I have to say about that. In the second half of this video, the thing that I want to talk about, and it relates to all three of the videos I've done so far. I've done that video on note taking, so go back and watch that. I've done the video on watching match footage. You can go back and watch that. And I suppose what I'm going to talk about now fits into all of those because it's understanding how we learn. So this is the what we call metacognition. All right, big brain stuff, guys. So it's just kind of scary. All right, big words. I'm going to explain a lot. I understand if you tune out of this, but I don't give a fuck. I need to say it for posterity anyway. Metacognition is understanding how we learn. Okay, like jiu-jitsu people are not all academics. Okay, a lot of people think, oh, he's a black belt, so he knows what he's talking about. I know a lot of black belts that barely can write their own name down. Okay, never mind read. Some I know, some of the best in the world, have never even read a fucking book. So we're not talking about Rhodes Scholars here. However, there's this misconception that because somebody's a black belt in the sport, that they're well educated and they're a specialist in absolutely everything now. No, they're not. Sometimes they're not even a specialist in jiu-jitsu. Okay? So, with that said, if you go to some random academy, you can't understand, or as a beginner or whatever, you can't understand the methodology behind teaching if the teacher doesn't even. Okay? And this is one of my biggest criticisms in the sport. The quality of instruction and teaching, even in 2025, is still super low because we have a guy who's maybe done the sport for 30 years, okay, has been very successful in competition or whatever and knows these moves, but doesn't understand how to correctly pass that information on to somebody else, okay? They haven't studied how to be a teacher. They haven't got any, like, academic qualifications. Not that that's necessary. You don't need a piece of paper to do it, but you do need to understand how people learn, right? Otherwise, like, just making a person do an armbar and just saying, oh, well, this is the way I do it, that's not contributing to learning, right? You're just holding a space where people are hopefully going to figure it out. And then when the majority don't, and one does, now that person looks amazing, okay? So I think that, that's a big observation that I've had, having traveled literally the world, and visiting academies on every continent. The quality of teaching generally in your average school is very low. So I was thinking about what we can best translate from metacognition. If there was one thing that can help improve the quality of your learning, even if you aren't in front of a good teacher, is understanding the circle of inquiry. Now, the people who are the best in the sport, the students of the game, if we want to call them that, and the people who best direct their own learning, understand how an inquiry works, right? Now, an inquiry is essentially like an investigation into something, okay? So when we talk about the circle of inquiry, I'm going to break it down into four main parts, okay? The circle of inquiry is a really useful way for you to go about undertaking a research topic into something of your choosing. In jiu-jitsu, that could be any move, technique, concept, or whatever. So, an inquiry, or the circle of inquiry, always starts out with a question, your hypothesis, right? So that's step one, right at the top, okay? I have noticed, here's an example, I have noticed that I am bad at passing the half guard. How can I better pass the half guard? All right, so that's my question. I've started off with this question and observation, right? Over the last 6 months, I, have really sucked at passing half guards. I've found myself there a lot, and I don't know how to deal with it. And so I'm feeling very frustrated, or whatever the case is. I want to make that better. So I start with a hypothesis, right? A question that is specific enough and like not massively general. I don't want to be going, how can I get better at jiu-jitsu? Way too broad, okay? Because everybody sucks anyway. So like be specific in your question, okay? How do I get better at leg locks? Whatever, like take a specific part of the game, and that's what you're going to do. So I've started an inquiry here. All right. First thing I need to go and do is I need to go and do some research, right? Or like I need to go seek out information. So I might go on Reddit, I might go on Google, I might get some DVDs, I might go watch some footage of like the best guys in the world passing the half guard in competition. You know, I look at a bunch of resources. I recommend, and when I give students a circle of inquiry and a research topic to do, that you look at 3 to 4 sources of information and you look at 3 to 4 resources at least. Okay, at least, right? Depends on how much time you've got or whatever. Now, that links back to what we were talking about just before with DVDs or with match footage. I might go watch 3 or 4 different matches. I might go watch 3 or 4 different pieces of technique from a DVD. I'm not saying go and watch 3 to 4 DVDs. That's way too much. You're looking at 12 to 16 hours of footage. You're going to have way too much information there. 3 to 4 sources of information. Now, how you pick those, there's also a little bit around that, right? Like you have to have enough critical thinking skills to look at this and go, okay, well, you know, this is reliable. So I'm watching someone that's actually good at it, not just some bullshit sci-fi artist online who has just made a move up. Go see what works in competition at the highest level. Start with reliable sources of information. You know, that is really important. Look at who is telling you the information. You know, absorbing reliable and useful information is important. There are a lot of snake oil salesmen out there who'll tell you this is the best kind of thing that I've ever seen, and you know, this is the best move ever. The more certain a person is, the less likely I am to believe them these days. I don't necessarily think that certainty and absolutes translate to reliability. I think people who can say, hey, you know, I've got this move that works in these situations. I've tried it here, I've tried it there. I know where it works and I know where it fails, and can best explain the move in context. Those are the people that I want to go listen to, not the person who says this is best move ever. This is, you know, this works every time. The absolutes, the every times, the everys and the nevers, ever and never, when I start hearing those, I immediately have question marks appearing. So anyway, stuff for you to think about when you're in that resource stage. So we've done step 1, you know, ask our hypothesis or pose our question. We've gone out into the woods, you know, we've selected information, you know, we've done our research here. Then we get to stage 3. Stage 3, arguably the most important here, and this is where everybody in the jiu-jitsu space fucks up, okay? This is called synthesis. Synthesis. And, you know, this is why we're starting to see this whole, and I'll bring it back again, the ecological debate and stuff like that. You know, it's such a fallacy. Okay, there's this A or B fallacy, black or white fallacy. You either have to be ecological or you have to be drilling. What happened to the fact that you could do both? What happened to the fact that if I have a brand new person who's never been on the map before and I throw them into ecological, I go, okay, here's this. The likelihood of them injuring themselves trying one of these things is extremely high. Or if they don't understand the goal of the game, or they don't understand the goals of jiu-jitsu, in a larger sense, or submission, or anything like that, I'm dealing with an extremely uncoordinated person. It might not work. Also, if we only just drill 100 arm bars ever, you know, that's not going to work for us either, because now, like, you don't actually really know anything. It's like learning how to write a word, but never learning a sentence. Whereas the other one, you're saying, hey, go write an essay, but not giving them any rules. To me, from an educator perspective, it's such a shallow argument to think that it's only one or the other here. So the synthesis part of this is about taking that information that you've just gathered, whether that's the drilling or the technique or whatever, and putting it into practice, the ecological or the game or the actual, live element. Okay. Synthesis is about taking what you've just went and learned in the resource gathering stage, the information gathering stage, and putting it into practice. How is this half guard pass that I've learnt from this person going to fit into my game? Okay, well, I'm going to go and try it in training for 6 weeks. That's the synthesis part here. You actually putting into practice what you've gone and learned. Okay. I feel like if people did this more often, you've just learnt the move of the night, okay? Or if we're doing ecological, here's a game where you have to get to chest on a person, okay, from half guard or whatever, okay? And I've gone and done research, and I bring this into class, and we've done the flipped classroom model or whatever the case is, or I just was doing it by myself. I can now put a move into practice and see its failure and its success points. Okay. And I get more and more data than the person who is just doing random shit, who's just thought about, oh, well, I'm just going to move this way, or I just see red pro or whatever. So, synthesis, step 3, super important there. Step 4, the final step, is about analysis. Okay. I've done the research, I've done the synthesis, and now what data can I draw from those two things? Well, I have found out that by using this move that I found in the research stage, that 10 out of 20 times that I tried it in 6 weeks, it worked. So it's got a 50% success rate. Out of that data, what could I do better? Okay, well, I wasn't that fit. I was eating like shit. I hadn't slept very well. I wasn't getting a massive amount of rounds in with good training partners or whatever the case is. Like we look at all of the elements in the analysis stage because analysis is about picking things apart. From analysis, we actually go back into the hypothesis and the question stage. So that circle continues. All right. So once I've done my analysis on this side over here, I start to go, okay, well, how can I make that style of passing more successful? That becomes my next hypothesis. That becomes the next question I've posed. And then we go into research and synthesis again. And we keep doing that and we keep doing that in a loop until we have finally satisfied our initial question or we've gone on to something else. But I think if you keep this circle of inquiry in mind, you will never really hit plateaus in your learning and in your improvement in jiu-jitsu, which is kind of the reason I wanted to talk about it. Because I used to hear this a lot from people, especially when it came to like the blue belt blues or whatever they want to call it. I'd see two kinds of things, right? The really fit, talented athlete go really quickly from white belt to blue belt, because you go from having seen nothing before to seeing all of these moves and trying to understand what this sport is and trying to make sense of everything. And then I saw the people who were very untalented, unathletic, and things like that, and it took them an extremely long time to go from white to blue belt. I don't want to say that these are the only two things they are, but like they're outliers on the ends of the bell curve, which I found interesting. The talented athletes who go from white belt to blue belt quickly, they see all the moves, they clock it really quickly and they just start beating everyone up in the gym, especially around their own level. So they look really good. But then they get to blue belt and they realize, well, I've learned all the moves, but my athleticism's no longer holding up against opponents with similar technique and similar athleticism or better technique. So they plateau. And because nothing's coming easy anymore, they tend to fade and people tend to quit. Blue belt has that like highest attrition rate, apparently. I don't know about that. I'd have to go and have a look. I don't know how well studied that is data wise, but there is a high attrition rate at blue belt. We then have the unathletic guy who really, really struggles. Maybe they have similar technique acquisition. They learn the same amount of things as the athletic guy. They just don't have the talent. They don't have the athleticism to execute the moves, whether it be in competition or whatever. And as a result, they look really bad in a room of their peers most of the time. They're struggling on the bottom. They're trying to make things work and they're failing a lot. But that person is more primed when they come to blue belt to not have the same suffering of the plateau, in my opinion, because they've already been sucking for so long that when they face adversity again, they've already built resilience. I think that if both of those people had a conscientious understanding of like the circle of inquiry, they could both continue through a plateau or see better improvement at any stage in their jiu-jitsu, whether it's white belt or blue belt. Equally, I think that the black belt or the person who's been training for a decade or longer can use the circle of inquiry to start finding those areas in their game where they need more work. There's that law of diminishing returns in jiu-jitsu, right? Like the longer you train, the harder it is to improve. From white belt to purple belt, you see the most improvement because you're always seeing new things. Your athleticism grows. You're going through that like beginner's gain stage. Your technique improves. You see a wider array of moves. And then by the time you get to black belt, you've kind of seen everything, or you should have anyway, in my opinion. Yeah, some people certainly haven't. Not talking about them anyway. But the idea here is that when you are fighting every week for marginally smaller and smaller increments of success and improvement by the time you get to black belt, you're trying to refine a move for the 100,000th time, an armbar, right? To improve at black belt is much harder than it is to improve at white belt. That's the basics when it comes to like the law of diminishing returns, right? So using the circle of inquiry as a black belt is an amazing way to keep yourself growing and to keep your technique sharp and sharper. So wherever you're at in your journey, I think understanding metacognition and understanding that little piece of pedagogy and how to use that should be something that's really useful. Anyway, thanks for listening to my caffeine-fueled rant. Hopefully any or all of this is helpful to you. Not really too sure what else I want to do in this series of learning jiu-jitsu. Maybe visualization, maybe a couple of other things. I'm not too sure. If you've got any suggestions on what you'd like to hear me yap about or kind of explain from a learning perspective, drop it in the comments. If you would like access to our resource page on Facebook, also just comment below and I'll send you a link. I've got a massive DVD library in there. We have discussion groups. I do breakdowns of matches. So yeah, I want it to be a useful and resourceful space for you. So if you would like to use that, let me know. Thanks for listening. Leave us a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.